Valerie Cole is from Andy's Agway in Dayton, and it's just a short drive from really anywhere in southern Maine. If you haven't visited, you're totally missing out because the location is beautiful and the store is so much fun. It's so much fun to like just shop around and see all the cool things in the store and then get great plants as well. The location is just amazing. And Andy's Agway has been supporting the library and has donated things to the past in our Biddeford Community Gardens programs and are always supportive of community organizations. So we just want to say thank you, Valerie, because we really appreciate all that support.
Well,
so without further ado, we are going to turn things over to Valerie.
All right. Well, thank you for that nice introduction. And as it happens, I do know Jane Goslin, our participant. So Jane, let me ask you, you and your husband, are you tapping any trees currently? Are you thinking about it? Just interested? Okay. And how many trees do you think you have? 2. Okay. And how big around are they, would you say? Oh, more than 2. Okay. How big around? At least 12 inches in diameter, 12 inches through the middle. Oh, you're muted. All right. Well, we'll talk a little bit about the sizes of trees. And actually, if I can share my very short PowerPoint now here. Let me just go to share screen here. And we'll share that. Everybody see that? We're going to put it on a slideshow, hopefully. Okay. So as you can you see that? Can everybody see that? Okay, great. So these are our talking points for tonight. We'll talk about when you start tapping, when you should stop tapping. We'll talk about cleanliness because that is a very important part of maple. We'll talk about actually tapping and collecting. And then, of course, after that is boiling and finishing. And then we're going to talk about scaling up because once you start, you either decide you're not going to do that again or you go big. So go big or go home, basically. And a lot of people start with a few taps and then they go big. So I am from Andy's Agway, but part of Andy's Agway new this year is Cole Farm Maple. And I want to give you just a little bit of history. Maple tapping has been done at Cole Farm for more than 50 years. Andy's grandfather and great-grandfather did it, and they boiled in a pan outside. And then when the sap neared the finishing point, they took it into the kitchen, and the women were not very happy because if you boil in the kitchen, all that sticky residue goes somewhere and it's on your cabinets. So eventually, at some point, the boiling took place in a little lean-to off the barn, and that was better, but it was still finished in the kitchen. And then Andy's cousin Clark came along, and at that point, syrup was just kept for the family. It wasn't sold or anything. Clark came along and decided to make a proper operation out of it. So he built a sap house, and syruping moved actually into its own building. And he did it for 50 years. And about 4 years ago, Andy and I thought that maybe we would like to get involved. So I shadowed Clark for 3 years. And then this year, I'm kind of moving up the ranks into the person who does the dirty work and the clean work. So we actually tapped the trees the first Saturday in February. And the reason we do it then is because you usually get a little break in the weather. It's maybe not as cold. Hopefully you don't have deep snow. You can actually get around out in the woods and drill your holes in the trees and put in the taps. And we'll talk more about taps in a moment. But that does not mean that the sap is necessarily running at that point. There have been times when we've tapped trees and the sap was gushing out in February. And there have been times like this year when we tapped trees, we got a little bit and then everything stopped for a couple of weeks because it was too cold. The temperature requirements for syruping or for tapping trees is above freezing during the day, preferably 40 or up, and below freezing at night. So the past couple of days have been a little bit of a challenge because it hasn't been that cold at night. I have a cat in my lap now. We did collect some sap today, but it was only about 80 gallons over 2 days. And on a good day, we'll collect easily 300 gallons. So I think at this point, we are nearing the end of the syrup season for this year. And again, Mother Nature determines everything. She decides when to start and she decides when to stop. You'd like ideally to get till the end of March, but I don't know if we're going to make it this year. I think this week might be it. And part of that is because as the weather warms up, the trees start to bud. And once the trees even think about budding, the quality of the sap changes. The sap decreases in the amount of sugar that's in it, but more importantly, the taste changes and it's not as good. So I have been the past few days fretting about the fact that my honeybees are out, because honeybees go for those early maple buds. So the fact that the bees are out tells me that they think the trees are ready for them and not for me. And also my neighbor heard peepers the other night. That's another sign that maybe the sap season is coming to an end. So we'll see. The sap we collected today looks pretty good, but if we get any that is lower in sugar content or has a yellow color to it or just doesn't taste as sweet, that's it. We're done. We're done. So that's starting and stopping. Around here, basically February through hopefully the end of March. Now, if you were to go up Maine, where some farms have 10,000 taps, I have about 500, they actually tap in December because it takes a lot of people and a lot of man hours to put in 10,000 taps in trees. So they start before the season really gets going. They just have to. But one thing about starting too early, and I would advise anybody around here, don't go out too early, because once you put a hole in the tree, you have basically wounded the tree. You've opened up a spot for bacteria to get in. Now, it turns out bacteria like sap as much as we do. Bacteria goes for sugar too, this particular bacteria. And a hole in the tree introduces the possibility for the bacteria to get into the tree and cause even more damage. Every time you put a hole in the tree, you do damage the tree a little bit, but maples are unique in their ability to quickly wall off that damaged area and work around it. So whenever we put a tap into the tree, we're careful where we put it in relation to previous taps. And I'll talk about that a little more in a moment. But let's move on first to keeping it clean. So if you are going to tap, keep everything clean, keep your equipment as clean as possible. When we go out in the woods, we go out with brand new drill bits. We don't use drill bits that came out of the garage. We buy fresh ones for every year because, again, we don't want to introduce anything to the tree. We happen to use mostly tubing around here. I'll talk about that a little later. We keep the tubing as clean as we can. If we do have buckets, they all get hosed out, rinsed out to start the year fresh. But we do not use soap. Everything is done with hot water, and so hot that you can't hold your hand under it. Because if you use soap in any plastic utensils, anything like that, there's always going to be a little bit of a residue, and sap is very unique in that it kind of gloms onto things. It sticks to plastic, it sticks to that residue. And then when you concentrate the sap, because that's basically what syrup is, it's concentrated sap, you're concentrating that soap residue or that chemical taste or anything like that. So everything that we do is cleaned with hot water. The only exceptions being the utensils that I use in the sap house. I do sterilize those in a very mild bleach solution, and then I rinse them with hot water after. But other than that, everything is hot water. So please don't use any buckets that come from Home Depot unless they're brand new and they're food grade. Please don't go to Riley's and get their frosting buckets, because you'll never, ever get the fat from the frosting out of them, and that will end up in your syrup. I'm even a little suspicious of 5-gallon buckets that have had jams and jellies in them, because again, that's a different product. There's a lot of sugar in there, yes, but there's artificial and natural flavorings. I wouldn't even use, the syrup bottles from the syrup drums from Coca-Cola, because again, it's been a different product in there, and the residue of that can end up being concentrated in your syrup. So it's okay if you use the same equipment year to year, as long as you clean it out, but start with good, clean, food grade equipment. And when you get to bottling your syrup, which we'll talk about later on too, again, you want to make sure that you are using good, clean food grade equipment. Mason jars are okay, but you can usually buy plastic maple jugs at a store like mine, along with the caps. If you want to reuse the jugs later, that's okay. Again, just clean them out with hot water and always put fresh caps on them. So that's my spiel about keeping it clean. And we'll move on to tapping. So when you tap a tree, whether you're tapping one tree or 500 or more, a couple things to consider. First of all, how big is your sugar bush? And your sugar bush, that's a term for the stand of trees that you're tapping. Your sugar bush might be 1 or 2 trees. And in that case, you probably are just going to work with buckets or with sacks. And I'm going to show you something here. So I love this picture right here of this sap bucket, except for 2 things. First of all, it's an old metal bucket and it probably has lead solder in it. Can you use it? A lot of people do. And if you have some, they are okay to use as long as they haven't had anything else in them like motor oil or this or that. But you have got to empty this every day. You don't want sap sitting in something with lead in it. To be honest, there have not been any studies done on if lead ends up in maple sap or not. But if we use buckets, we use all plastic buckets. And I don't know if you can see my little profile picture there. See this blue bucket here. This is a food grade sap bucket. And you can buy those at any Agway type store. They come with a hook and a cover. So although this bucket here, this metal one, is lovely and rustic, I've taken we have about 100, no, we have about 200 of those, and they will become ornaments because I just do not want any contact with the lead solder in them. The other thing that's interesting about this picture is you see these holes in the tree. We can see 4, 5, maybe 6. Those are all too close together. So that tap that's in this tree now is not going to be very productive because it is way too close to other holes. If you have a hole in the tree, next year you want to basically be you want to be at least 2 inches away from it, maybe more, or 6 or more inches above or below it. So I like to take my hands like this and say, okay, if that old tap is right in the middle, it's got to, get myself on the screen here, it's got to be, the new tap has to be outside this area. And that goes back to what I talked about earlier, the maple tree having a remarkable ability to really wall off that damaged area. So these 2 taps here, way too close together. And I would bet whichever tap was the second year probably didn't produce very much at all. So other things that you can use for tapping other than buckets like this are these plastic sacks with a special metal holder. And I have not tried these personally. I have them. I have not tried them because I have tons of gray and red squirrels, and turns out they like sugar too. So they would gnaw holes in the bottom of those sacks and have just a field day with them. So actually what we use is this tubing, as you can see in this bottom right-hand picture. And if you have a lot of trees, this really is the way to go. So what you do is you drill that hole in the tree. And when I talk about drilling holes, we use a 5/16 bit. That's pretty standard. And then we put in a special tap, and it looks like, can everybody see this? Everybody see that? So this part goes into the tree. This part here connects to the tubing. And I do have one made up. Where did it go? Here it is. Here we go, right here. All right. So there's a couple different kinds of these spouts. This is the same idea, just a little different spout on this one. And then this part here connects to what we call either a lateral or a main line. And those are simply bigger tools that eventually all converge together. Now this whole piece here, it's not quite a yard. It's called a drop line. And you can run a drop line from the tree into a bucket, or what we do, you can run this drop line to, again, a lateral or a main line, again, just slightly bigger tubing that all come to a center collection point. So currently we've got probably 300 spouts on, a little more than that, on a number of main lines. And each main line has several laterals off it, and each lateral has a lot of these drop lines, and each tree has either one or two drop lines on it. Now you can tap a maple tree when it's as big as 12 inches in diameter. That is, if you went right through the center, if it was at least 12 inches across. And you can do the, do the math and figure out how big around that is. A little over 36 inches. I think it's like 38 or something. And when a tree is about 15 inches in diameter, then you can put 2 spouts in it. And then as it gets older, you don't necessarily put more spouts in it because you won't get more sap necessarily. And in fact, there's some very interesting research being done that suggests maybe it's just better to have 1 spout all the time. Now, this tree here, I'm assuming that's a spout for every year. I hope they didn't put 2 that close together. But again, remember, every time you drill a hole in, whether you put a spout in or whether you put a drop line like this, that you are damaging the tree. So you want to be careful where you put those. So let's go back a little bit here. So tapping is fun. I kind of like going out with that. I get my own drill and go out and drill holes in the trees and put something into them. When you drill a hole in the tree, you only go in about 1.5 inches. Any deeper than that, and you're getting beyond that layer where the sap has the most flow. Any less than that, you're not quite getting into that layer. So the depth is important. And you want to drill straight in and come right back out just as soon as you can. Used to be people said, oh, drill at an angle going up so that gravity will help feed the sap out of the tree. Well, now we know if you do that, your exit hole is not going to be a perfect circle. It's going to be slightly oval shape, and that won't work very well when you're using these particular spouts and these drop lines and things like that. So straight in, straight out as fast as you can to do minimum damage to the tree. Now, I've talked a little bit about drop lines and tubing, but of course, if you have buckets, you've got spouts that go into the tree like this. This is the old, well, I can't say old. This is the spout I grew up with. I as a kid, we tapped trees. This is what we had, and comes with a little hook. You hang your bucket on that. Now we have these new, what they call tree saver spouts. And I don't know if you can see that very well. It's just a lot slimmer. So it does less damage to the tree. So it actually goes into the tree like this, and then you can hang a bucket on it. If you ever decide you're going to go with tubing, the great debate in the maple industry is 5/16 or 3/16, and that refers to the diameter of your drop line. And pretty much everybody agrees now that 5/16 is the way to go. There are studies that have been done showing that tubing that's 3/16 in diameter does fantastic the first year, but by the 3rd year, it's producing less than, the tree is producing less than a 5/16 tubing. So 5/16 is a magic number to remember if you're going to tap trees. That's the size of your bit. That's the size of your tubing if you use it. That is the magic number. So let's assume you've got all your trees tapped, whether they're 3 with 2 spouts apiece or whether you've got 500 tapped. Then you've got to think about collecting. So if you have a few trees, buckets are the way to go. And once a day or so, depending on the weather, you go around, you collect all your sap, bring it to a central location where you're going to boil it. If it's a really good day, you might collect a couple times. Some trees are very prolific and put out a tremendous amount of sap in one day. They can do 1 gallon of sap a day. Of course, that's not 1 gallon of syrup. That's the syrup is a lot less, but trees can be very prolific. And the type of maple that it is matters. You can tap any maple tree, but some, such as the sugar maple, will give a lot more sap than others. Trees that are near a wet area tend to give more sap, although it's not necessarily sweeter sap. It may just be more sap because they have greater access to water. Black maples are very good Rock maples, that's another name for the sugar maple. But even silver maples can be tapped, although they don't produce as much sap, and it might not be as high in concentration. So let's say you've been out, you've tapped everything, now you're starting to collect. Again, you might be using buckets, or you might, if you're using tubing, you might have great big tanks that you're collecting into. We've got a couple tanks here that hold about 350 gallons of sap, but we also have shorter lines with just drop lines and shorter runs with just drop lines and lateral tubing that empty into like a plastic trash can that's never been used for anything else. And it's, it's all cleaned and we're sure it's not putting out any plastic gases or anything like that. We're very particular about that. But you want to make sure that whatever you collect in is big enough to hold the sap on a good day's run. So if you don't have a huge container, that means you're out there a couple times picking up. So let's say you've got your sap now, you're actually going to start boiling. So magic number 87.1. That is a variation on what is called the Jones rule of 86. I think probably everybody has heard that it takes 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup, right? Not quite true. It's actually closer to 87.1. For a long time, everybody thought it was 86 gallons. And a little research has shown that 87.1 is a more feasible number. So what does that mean? That means that to figure out how many gallons of syrup you're going to get, you have to find out your sugar content first and divide that into 87.1. So let's say I had sap that was 2% sugar into 87.1. That's what I'm going to need, roughly 43 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. Now that's a lot. That is a lot. But you consider, say, a week later at the end of the season, if the sap you're collecting is only 1% sugar, that's 87 gallons of sap that you need to make 1 gallon of syrup. So we all pay attention to the sugar content. And the way to do that is with either a sap hydrometer or a Sap Refractometer. Now, I did not have a Sap hydrometer to bring with me, but I do have a refractometer to show here. Can everybody see that? This is a digital device. What I do is I put a sample of sap in this little well, close it up, push the read button. It gives me an instant read of what the sugar concentration is in that particular sample. Then I push the button again for basically 15 pulse tests, and it gives me an average. So I know within a moment what the concentration is on my sap. If you were doing it with a hydrometer, it's a little more involved. A hydrometer is basically an instrument that looks like an old-time thermometer, but it's bigger and it's got a little bigger bulb on the end. And you have to account for the temperature and such. It can be done. But the thing I like about this digital refractometer is I can also use it when I'm boiling to get a reading on the syrup. If you don't have a sap hydrometer, that's fine. You don't need one. It's another bell and whistle kind of thing, another gadget. But you should know when you're boiling, when you reach the syrup point with your sap. And there's a couple of ways to do that. Again, hydrometers, syrup hydrometers, which are different than sap hydrometers, or a refractometer like what I have. Also pay attention to your temperature. Sap does not become syrup until you reach 218, 219 degrees. I like to go with 219 just to be safe. Some sugar makers draw off. What that means is they take the syrup out of the boiling system at 220 degrees or 221. The higher you go, the thicker you get that syrup. So let's say you're boiling away, whether you're doing it on your kitchen stove or outside with a clean pan over a fire or on top of your grill. Or I know some people use turkey fryers. Probably not the best thing, but some people do. It's okay as long as it's clean. You definitely need a way to accurately record the temperature, because if you don't get up to 219 degrees, you're not really making syrup. You're making really hot sap. So temperature is critical. And like I said, hydrometers are very healthy. So in a backyard operation, you might just boil 1 or 2 times. You know, you might, it might be so much work that you're not going to boil every day. You're not going to boil every other day. If you're not going to do that, keep that sap cold, just as cold as you can. And here's a very nifty hint. If you put it in the freezer, the water in the sap will freeze, leaving you with more concentrated sugar. We call that nature's reverse osmosis. So the people who bring sap to us, if they can't get it to me on a certain day, I tell them, put it in the freezer, take the ice off the top after, and that will actually concentrate the sugar content in your sap because you've basically taken some water out of it. Now, bigger operations like people up Maine who are doing 10,000 taps, or even smaller operations like we have, a lot of people have something called a reverse osmosis machine, which does that too. You basically force that sap through a couple membranes, and you're removing a good portion of the water. You're concentrating that sap, and then your boiling time is less. And if you are paying, what's the price on kerosene today? Like close to $5? I don't know. If you're paying for kerosene to fire your evaporator, the more efficient you can be, the happier you will be at the end of the day. Of course, if you're doing it at home on your stove and you're doing a few gallons, you know, that's fine. But if you're going into a commercial operation at all, the more efficient you can be with your fuel, the better. So let's say that you have you've boiled off your sap. Okay, you put it in the freezer, you concentrated it, you took the ice out, you boiled your sap, you got to 219 degrees, and it's got that lovely caramel color, and it smells wonderful, and it's really thick. You are pretty much done at that point if you're a home operation. You're just going to bottle it into something with a good seal on it. If you're a bigger operation, then your next step is what we call standardizing or finishing. And what that means is that you're going to put several batches of syrup together, and you're going to heat them up again so that, and mix them up so that they're all the same. Because when you're drawing syrup off an evaporator, sometimes you may draw it off at 219, another time it may be 220, 221. Not every batch is the same. You already have variations because you've got trees in different locations, and you've collected during days of different weather, and you know, the concentration goes up and down depending on where the tree is or how far you are into the season. When you standardize it or finish it, you're taking several gallons of syrup at one time and blending them together to get a nice finished product. So again, you're heating syrup up to 219 degrees in a commercial operation. At home, you would already be done. You'd boil, you'd bottle, you're done. In a commercial operation, you're actually going to heat syrup up 3 times. Once when you're boiling it, once when you standardize it, and then when you bottle it. And what I do before I bottle it, after I've standardized it, before I bottle it, I put it through what is called a filter press to filter out any of the remaining sugar sand or niter that happens in syrup. Now, you're not likely to have a filter press at home, and I don't have one to show you because it's kind of a heavy machine, but you can buy paper filters to run your hot syrup through before you bottle, just to capture that sugar sand. And what sugar sand is the minerals that the tree takes up in its roots and are in the sap, but they don't precipitate out until you hit 219 degrees. So another reason, again, for heating up your syrup to the proper temperature. At 219 degrees, those particular minerals tend to come out, and they don't, if you left them in, they wouldn't hurt you. They're just minerals, basically micronutrients. But they would settle at the bottom of your syrup and be just like little gritty things, and they make your syrup look a little cloudy. So I don't have a sample of unfiltered syrup because I do filter everything before I bottle it, but I brought a sample of filtered syrup so that you can see how clear that is. You see right through it. That's actually considered a dark syrup, although it's on the lower end of the dark spectrum. But when you filter your syrup, then you get this nice clear syrup and what we call sparkle, meaning that it's like looking through clear water. a syrup that isn't filtered slightly murky. So filtering is a good thing if you can do it. And again, you can find paper filters to filter your syrup at home. And after that, what we have left to talk about is bottling. And again, you want to put your syrup into clean containers. So please, no pickle jars. Even though you've washed them, there's still that ever so slight residue of vinegar. You've done all this work to make your syrup, put it into nice, clean, new jars. And if you're going to store it for a while, if you can get the bottles with the heat tops, the ones that screw on tight, and the heat activates the seal on it. Those are those little styrofoam caps you have to peel off everything when you know, like if you buy a bottle of syrup from me. So you put your syrup into the bottle, you screw that new cap down tight, and then you lay the bottle on its side, and that helps the heat from the syrup activate that heat seal around the top of your bottle. Unless it's a bottle like this has a little different collar on it. See that little plastic collar there, and inside it's got that little white disc. All right. Any questions so far before we talk about scaling up? No? Okay. So like I said earlier, if you decide you're going to tap trees, you'll either do a few and decide it's way too much work for the amount of syrup you get, or you'll do a few and say, hey, this is cool, I want to keep going. So like any hobby, whether it's sewing or bees or anything like that, it's all about the gadgets, and you can always go bigger. And the magic number seems to be about 500 taps. People who have 500 taps or less are considered hobbyists. If they have 500 taps or more, they better be thinking about selling syrup, because that's kind of borderline commercial operations there. So in the state of Maine, if you want to sell your syrup, you really should be licensed. You absolutely should be licensed. And the most important parts of licensing are that somebody comes out and inspects your premises to see if you're clean, if you're doing things properly. They don't watch you do it. They just want to know that you have hot water and clean equipment, and you know what you're doing, and you know what you're talking about. But the thing that the state of Maine worries about the most is labeling. You have to be properly labeled. So that means on something like this was a plain jar when I got it. 3 things I have to label. I've got to tell you what kind of syrup it is. This is a dark robust. I have to tell you where it was made. So I have my little sticker on it. It's hard to see on this one, but it's right here. It says Cole Farm Maple, and it has my address. I'm working on new labels with nice logos. And I have to tell you when it was bottled and what size container this is. This is 100 ml. A lot of the plastic containers that you buy, they already have the volume printed on it, so that's nice. But those are the things that the state of Maine is concerned about. Now, you can sell syrup if you have fewer than 500 taps, if you wish, certainly. But again, you should be licensed, and you should be aware of those labeling requirements. So what makes a syrup too is not just the fact that you got to 219 degrees, but that you concentrated the sugar to the right amount. And when we talk about sugar concentration, we're talking about a measurement called Brix. That's B-R-I-X, measure of the sugar concentration in the solution. And the state of Maine wants you to bottle your syrup at 66.9 Brix. I got to tell you, that's a moving target, and that's pretty hard to heat when you've got 8 or 10 or 15 gallons of syrup at 219 degrees. That's kind of a moving target, because the temperature can go up so quickly those last few minutes. So the state would like you to have exactly 66.9 degrees, but they want you to have at least 66.9 Brix. But you have to have at least 66 Brix to make all this happen. Any less than that, and you don't have the proper consistency in the syrup. Any more than that, and it's very easy for the sugar to precipitate out of the syrup and end up as maple syrup maple sugar crystals in the bottom of the jug. And then people who don't know think that, oh, somebody added sugar to make this sweet. Well, no, nobody added sugar to the maple syrup. It's just the natural process of there being more solids in that solution than the solution can handle. And if you ever took chemistry class and had to do any experiments with saturation, then you might remember that. So those are basically the requirements if you're scaling up. You'll find that you're buying more equipment and bigger equipment, and you get into evaporators and reverse osmosis machines and standardizers and canners. It's like any hobby, you can just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But I don't mean to sound off-putting. This is something you can do in your backyard a little bit. Oh, one more thing I want to show you. I talked a little bit about grading. At home, you don't need to grade your syrup. You're going to eat it regardless, right? But it is kind of fun to talk about grading because it's kind of a unique way that it is done. I have two ways of grading here. The one is the old-fashioned manual kit, and I don't think you can really see that well. I'm going to take them out individually. This is the kit itself, this little wooden tray with 4 holes and 3 bottles. And what you would do before the digital age is you would put your sample bottle, can you see that? That's my sample bottle from the 19th. You would put that into this wooden tray and you would say, okay, is it darker or lighter than the one next to it? And then you would move things around accordingly so you work from light to dark. Now this is a sample of Golden Delicate syrup. See how light color that is? Golden Delicate means very light color and a very mild taste. I have never made Golden Delicate syrup, and I probably never will because I don't have the equipment to run the syrup through that quickly. The longer sap is in an evaporator, the more you cook it, the darker it gets. People who make this, I figure that sap must just kiss that evaporator going through, and that's it. I don't have that kind of equipment. I will probably never make this. The next step up, and you can see the difference between the two. This one is what we call an amber rich, and it's the medium syrup. It is medium color and a rich taste. I have a chance at making this as I get more experienced. And then the last grade that we talk about for consumers is dark robust. Now you see the difference between the dark robust and the amber rich. Now look at the difference between the dark robust and the Golden Delicate. Quite a difference. This is the one with the strong taste, and actually in my mind this is the only syrup anyway. If I'm going to eat maple syrup, I want a nice strong maple taste. So that's the standard for a dark robust, and this is what I made the other day. So pretty close, pretty close. And having said that, there is a range of numbers, and the grade is it's a measure of how translucent your syrup is, how much light can go through it. So I actually, this is fun to play with, this kit, but I actually use a digital grader, and I take a sample of my syrup and I put it in this thing and I push the button and say, okay, tell me what number it is. And then that number falls on a scale of 3 categories, and it's either delicate or rich or robust. So digital age comes to a traditional production. Any questions I can answer? I do have one more slide to show here. So these are some great resources. If you think you want to do anything with maple at all, these are all great. Southern Maine Maple Sugar Makers Association is our local, basically York and Cumberland County, although there are members throughout the state. These are people who have a lot of smaller sugar bushes, and we meet about 10 times a year. Maine Maple Producers is the statewide organization, and their job really is to promote the business of maple in the state of Maine. University of Maine has wonderful resources as far as how to do it. You know, if you're a small operation, if you're a backyard person, if you want to go large, make it a business, definitely check out the University of Maine. University of Vermont, of course, being Vermont, has wonderful resources as well. I think Maine is third in the country for maple syrup production. New York is ahead of us, and Vermont. New York mainly because it's a bigger land mass. We actually produce a lot of maple syrup for our geographic size. But 75% of the world's maple production comes from Quebec. And there it is treated like oil. Quebec actually controls how much is produced and how much is released on the market at any given time, not at all like in the States. Leader Evaporator is one of the big equipment producers. They make evaporators and reverse osmosis machines, things like that. I like that site because they have some really wonderful videos, and they're not videos geared towards your $10,000, your 10,000 tap operations. They're geared towards people who want to do something at home. And the same with CDL. Big rivalry between Leader and CDL. The Leader spokesperson likes to refer to CDL as can't duplicate Leader. So it's all in good fun, but they also have very, very good videos on maple syrup production. So any questions? Anything I can answer?
Valerie, your presentation was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks.
I have just a question about timing. If you have say if you collected 5 gallons of sap, how long would it take you to cook that down to?
Yeah. Excellent question. And there is no guaranteed answer. It depends on the size of the equipment that you're doing. Now, if you're using a pan, the bigger surface area you can get over a heat element, the faster it will evaporate. So if you put your sap into a stock pot, it's going to take longer than if you put it into a roasting pan on top of a grill. Again, surface area, the more heat you can get into it at once, the faster it will go. Now, that's the number one concern of people who produce large amounts of syrup. They're always talking about the size of their evaporator. That's the first question maple people ask you. Well, maybe the second. The first is, how many taps you got? And then the second is, how big's your evaporator? And the one we have right now is a 3 by 6. That's not quite 3 o'clock. I have a 2 by 6. And it's kerosene fired, meaning that kerosene is my fuel source that heats up the pans. Okay. But within that evaporator, because remember, I've RO'd it first. I've run it through a reverse osmosis. So I've basically concentrated my sugar at least twice, sometimes 3 times. So if I started out with a 2.5% sugar concentrate and I've RO'd it to 7.5, I've tripled the concentration, which means I've taken out 2/3 of the water. Okay, so I run it through my evaporator. My evaporator has baffles in it so that the baffles increase the surface area, more hot metal coming in contact with that sap so that I can evaporate it faster. I'm also running it through something called a preheater, which is above my evaporator. And that means that when the system gets going, the steam from the evaporator itself rises up into this hood, heats that sap that's flowing down into the evaporator. It's kind of a complicated system there. And means that I spend less time evaporating. I still figure that evaporator at peak efficiency would be 25 gallons an hour. So if I'm doing 150 gallons of concentrated sap, that's still a 6-hour day just boiling. Wow. So if you're at home, well, let's see. I had a friend tell me the other day, a beekeeper friend. No, somebody else. He had a couple gallons of sap. He ended up with like a cup or a pint maybe, but he was all day doing it. Wow. I don't know what kind of pan he had it in, but my whole point is, if you're doing it in a pan, get the biggest pan you can. The more surface area you can expose to heat, the faster the process will go. Some things to watch out for, though. It takes forever to get to the boiling point, to get up to 219. When you get to about 215, it's going to seem like hours getting there. It goes very quickly from 215 to 219, and it's very easy to burn things because that last few degrees, instead of a nice steady increase in temperature like this, The last few degrees are like this. If I could show you a chart, my good book is over at the store, but those last few minutes are critical because the temperature will increase so quickly, and it's due to the increased sugar content in the sap. So you really need to be paying attention. We have a saying, you don't walk away from an evaporator. And that's very true. If I have a lot to do, I've got a helper there so that if I need to go take a bathroom break or I want to get something to eat, somebody is watching that equipment. If I only have, 2 or 3 or 4 hours to boil, I'm okay by myself. But longer than that, you want to have somebody to watch things so that you get a break. So there is no clear-cut answer. It's just, it's a day-long activity. We'll leave it that way. It used to be that syruping was kind of a community event and people would come together, bring their sap, and it would be a day-long thing. Kids would run around and play and adults would sit and wait and bring, food. And then in the evening or at night, sometimes your syrup would be done.
Nice.
So Val,
Yes.
once it has reached 219, do you immediately filter it and bottle it while it's still very hot?
At home, you absolutely could. It's kind of like canning. If you've ever canned, everything
Yeah.
happens all at once. So you want to make sure your equipment is ready. Your bottles are ready to go. If you're using a funnel, that's ready to go. Everything's right there.
Okay.
I do not bottle right after because I'm going to put it in a standardizer. So I might have 3 different boilings that I standardize all at the same time. Or it's happened a couple times this year. I've made so much syrup in one day that I've had to bottle the next day. So, but at home, definitely you want to bottle that as soon as you can, as soon as you filter it. Yeah.
Got it.
So you could use the canning jars with the canning lids.
Yeah, you can use canning jars. Yeah, make sure that lid is down tight, and I would lay them on their side again so the heat helps activate that little bit of that seal inside your canning jar.
Okay.
And another thing, if you don't, you can always put maple syrup in jugs in your freezer. They won't freeze. Once you've reached that proper concentration, the syrup will not freeze. And that's a really kind of a great way to take up that extra room in your freezer, as you know how freezers are more efficient if they don't have a lot of dead
Right.
space.
Mhm.
So that's perfectly fine. If you ever do happen to open up your syrup and find a little bit of mold on the top, it can happen if you haven't heated it to the proper temperature or for whatever reason. You can actually take that mold off the top and reheat the rest of it, and it's okay. So reheating the rest of it kills the bacteria. But for what I'm doing, I'm heating that stuff 3 times. I'm boiling it to 219 or 220. I'm standardizing it to 219 again, his cat. And then when I can it, I'm doing that at 190, 195 degrees. So when you buy something from a licensed sap house like us, you can be pretty sure it's been heated past the point of exhaustion on the part of the producer.
I have another question. Do you make maple sugar?
I do not yet. I am not that experienced yet. Like I said, this is really just my 4th year. My first year is kind of being the in front and in charge person. I would like eventually to make maple jelly, actually, which is not a lot of people here do it because it's a little tricky. You don't do it with pectin. You do it with a product called Genugel. And this maple syrup doesn't have any pectin in it to begin with. So you have to, and if you put fruit pectin in it, it won't work. You'll have maple syrup with fruit pectin floating on the top. So it's a particular product that you need to mix into the maple syrup to make it gel. So that would be my thing. I have friends though that do, maple coated nuts and maple cream and maple candies and all this and that. But first of all, I would need a little different kitchen than what I have.
I have one quick question, and this is for the people that will be viewing this, I'm sure, on our YouTube channel. Do you have any books that you would recommend for people to start out with maple syrup?
Absolutely. Let's see. Do I have them here? So the standard is Backyard Sugaring. And that's a book that's been in production for many years. I would recommend any of the printouts from the University of Maine website. but not the UNH one, interestingly enough. I found some things on there that were outdated and inaccurate, but definitely anything you find on University of Maine site is good, and the same with the UVM, University of Vermont. There are some other books out there. There is, it's available as a download. There is the, what is it? The Northeast Guide to Maple Sugaring, that's produced by the Cooperative Extension of Ohio. You can, it's no, I don't think it's available in print form any longer, but you can download a PDF of it. And if you're really ambitious, you can print out all 300 pages, or you can just keep it on your tablet and take that around with you. That's fine too. And that covers everything. That covers tree health and tapping and collecting and boiling and marketing. And it's aimed at both the people who want to do just their own, you know, backyard sugarers, right up through commercial. So that's an excellent resource as well. And like I said, the videos from Leader and CDL, very good. And as far as equipment, I like to go through, you see that? This is Bascom's catalog. They're in New Hampshire. They are distributors for a number of different manufacturers like CDL and Leader. And they cater to everybody from people who have 2 or 3 taps right up through 10,000 taps, and they produce syrup themselves too. In fact, I think they have a listing of books in the back, and I might be able to give you some. Okay, yeah. So here are some titles. Okay.
Ready.
How to Make Maple Syrup. That's a story guide. Story Publishers. Anything by Story Publishers is good. I don't care if it's goats, horses, maple syrup. Anything by Story is good. There is, let's see, Maple Sugar Sap to Syrup book is very good, and the Sugar Maker's Companion as well. And there's a Backyard Sugaring for Hobbyists. And you can go online and look at Bascom's website as well. They have equipment for everybody from 4 taps up to 10,000. Like I said, they sell evaporators, ROs, buckets, everything. And it's a nice ride up there if you want to go get your own stuff.
Terrific. Before we wrap up, can you just remind us again of your location and the hours for the Sugar House this weekend?
Absolutely. So I am not open on Sunday. That's probably the #1 point. We're only open on Saturday at Andy's Agway. Our address is 13 Cole Farm Road, but the location is River Road in Dayton, just over the line from Biddeford into Dayton. The store and the Sap House are open from 8 till 4. We have pony rides and face painting from 9 until 1. Pony rides are $5 a piece. I'm not doing pony rides. I think that's what I heard. And the face painting is by donation. And the young lady doing the face painting is one of our employees. This is her first time face painting, so she's excited. And we will have ice cream samples with maple syrup, and we will have syrup for sale. And of course, we have spring products out like seeds.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Well, Valerie, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
We
Thank
really
you for having me.
appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
And as soon as we get the video recording set, Joe will send it out to people that participated. So those that didn't come but signed up for it will get a copy of the recording as well.
Wonderful.
So
Great.
thank you all for
so
joining
much.
us this evening. If you have any
Thank you so
follow-up
much.
questions.
It was wonderful.
Oh, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Look-
Valerie.
All right. Take care, everybody. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.